Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for listening. I have had the opportunity now to share this small piece of my journey a few times, and I find symbolism in doing so in a library setting where there are so many stories to tell, and where curiosity, learning, and community are so prevalent. We are a community of survivors. We choose to break the silence, expose some of the most vulnerable moments of our lives to inform the public of the tragedies that happen behind closed doors, educate the inner circle, the police, the lawyers, the DAs, the judges, that have a direct impact on victim safety and their ability to protect themselves and their children, and to change a system which was created to maintain power and control over women in a patriarchal society. As I share with you tonight, surrounded by the words of authors well known, my hope is that you leave here with some new vocabulary that helps you to understand what has happened to us, what is happening to us, and to so many other women, men, and children in our communities. Words are so powerful. When we read them, we create images in our mind, like when we get lost in a good book. But they can also be impactful in the other way, when said out loud, like telling a child, "That's not good enough," creating the image that they themselves are the one that's not good enough. Hollywood has done a great job of facilitating the myth of domestic violence. Typically, we see a battered woman, her bruises explained away by a bad fall. This is why I prefer the term domestic abuse. It creates a different image. Abuse is not always violent. Domestic tells us that it's happening within a household, between family members or intimate partners. And abuse describes the physical piece, but also includes the emotional, the sexual, and the financial assaults that we have all experienced. Most of us shatter the stereotypes of domestic abuse. I am a strong, independent, well-educated entrepreneur with a stable home and a wonderful, supportive family. I was married to a man for almost 10 years. We have 2 amazing children, and we are now successfully divorced. He is my best friend, my biggest supporter, and an incredible co-parent. And yet, I ended up falling for a man after I was divorced, that I would become entangled with for 4 years in an abusive relationship that, although is over now, he continues to assault me using post-separation abuse that is worse than any I suffered while we were together, because now he uses the only connection that we have, our 7-year-old son. Post-separation abuse is the ongoing, willful pattern of intimidation of a former intimate partner, including legal abuse, economic abuse, threats and endangerment to children, harassment, and stalking. I fell in love very quickly with this man. I was wooed into a relationship with a technique called love bombing. Love bombing is a tactic that uses extreme displays of attention and affection with an intent to manipulate a person. I was enthralled with the phone calls and the flowers and the weekend getaways, the intimacy that I had been lacking before meeting him. I felt loved, cared for, sexy, worthy, and it was addicting. Once I was committed to him, the small moments began to take place. A snide comment, a question of loyalty, a backhanded compliment, the silent treatment, a subtle conversation that he would derail, and it would evolve into an argument over something as simple as my choice of words. He would become overly attentive to a friend or to my young daughter, and suddenly I would disappear. And so began the gaslighting. Gaslighting is a manipulative method which calls into question your own sanity and power of reasoning. These things happened slowly and subtly, and I had no idea that I was being manipulated in an abusive relationship. For a while, I thought he was bipolar like his father, or some other mental health issue that he needed help with, and I thought, no, I knew I could help him. He played to my empathy and my natural ability to want to give of myself. But now I know that mental health is not an excuse for abuse. I became a shell, losing over 40 pounds in a few short months, weak in body and in mind. I still had no idea I was in an abusive relationship, and he continued to control me. I would say he was difficult, temperamental, struggling with personal demons, and any other justification that I could make for his behavior. What he actually was disrespectful, narcissistic, sociopathic, and abusive. And so we had a baby. This was something that, from the outside, seemed a beautiful thing. A miracle, two loving parents bringing a child into the world. Behind closed doors, I was terrified and completely unprepared for the dangers that this unplanned and unpredicted pregnancy would put me and this new baby in. I wasn't raped. I was coerced. Reproductive coercion is a collection of behaviors that interferes with decision-making related to reproductive health. He told me he was unable to have children. I remember the doctor's appointment he made for fertility testing very early on in our relationship. The doctor's appointment where he discovered that his sperm count was too low and he was unable to conceive. It was another manipulative lie. And when he feared I had discovered his recent affair and he worried that I would end the relationship for good, I suddenly became pregnant. Having a child can change the way you look at things. Whew. Sorry, somebody's text just went off, and that is the sound of the text that I used when he and I were together. Sorry. Yep, triggers. Okay. Thank you. I think I will do that. Sorry. Little things can set you off. Look at that. Woo. Okay. Having a child can change the way that you look at things. It changed the way I looked at him. He was possessive of our child. Breastfeeding was deemed selfish because it meant I had our son all to myself. He was determined that I used breastfeeding as an excuse to keep him separated from his son. So whenever he could, he would take the baby into the bedroom and lock the door. This was his time. I could hear my son crying. I knew he was hungry, but I wasn't allowed in the room. One day at 7 months old, his father decided that if I could take the baby to work, then so could he. So for 10 hours, he avoided my calls and desperate texts. He force-fed our son formula, and he brought him to construction sites, strapped in his car seat or napping on the floor of his office. That is when I decided to leave. It took me several more months to find the courage, and little did I know what I was about to face. Post-separation abuse, protection orders, court-ordered co-parenting counseling, mediation, guardian ad litems, witness protection advocates, pretrial hearings, motions to expedite, motions to continue, motions of contempt, emergency motions, victim statements, depositions, child support worksheets, pages and pages of discovery, and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Tracking devices, new license plates, new cars, weeks out of state on the run, pleading with school officials, YMCA directors, and anyone with contact to my children to please be on the lookout for this man that wants to harm me and my children. Avoiding friends, not knowing who might share information with him. Scanning the parking lot at the grocery store before deeming it safe to go inside, and then stopping at the end of each aisle to make sure that it was safe before proceeding. Are you exhausted yet? Me too. And so are my children. I will leave you with one final vocabulary word: victim blaming. How many of you have ever thought, why doesn't she just leave him, right? We can all say that. Well, that exhaustive list that I just shared are just a few of the reasons why. It is not her fault, and there is no shame in admitting that you are in or have been in an abusive relationship. I did not choose to be abused. I did not choose to expose my children to the torture and the torment that we all continue to endure. My journey continues from victim to survivor to finally being able to thrive. That is my goal, to thrive. I hope that my vocabulary lesson tonight, along with a small piece of my story, helps you to see domestic abuse in the light. I look forward to answering any questions or talking about any other part of my journey with whoever feels comfortable. Thank you so much for listening.
Pam, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So I do a fair amount of speaking about domestic violence and sexual assault, but I don't often share my own story. And when Patricia asked me to share my story today on the panel, I really had to think about where did that story begin. And I say that because, I'm born into a world, I was born in 1968, born into a world that's still true today, that contains a lot of violence, right? And that violence is sometimes within our family. It's definitely within all of our communities. It's within our state, our nation, and our world. And so sometimes when I do some public speaking, I'll ask the question, who in the room has not been, touched in some way by domestic abuse? And no one can raise their hand because we're surrounded by it. And we know people, right? Even if it's not us directly. And sometimes we tell ourselves, this won't happen to me because I do this or I don't do this. And that's a way to have that illusion of safety. And I think, it's been really helpful to hear these stories because we have an idea in our head about what a victim looks like, what a perpetrator looks like, these words we use, what a survivor looks like. And we have ideas about how they've lived their lives. And we often find that our assumptions are not true or they're not complete, and that we're multifaceted people, And so my story, it begins there in 1968 with my birth, and I observed some domestic violence within my own family around the time that I was 10 years old. And that was really the first time I became aware of that dynamic and the impact of it, in a really limited way at that point in my life. And then I continued on, and, I had friends in high school that had situations that happened that were harmful to them that I was aware of. I had my own experiences, limited experiences. And I went into nursing in 1987, entered nursing school, and I began to see in the emergency room, women coming in, men coming in, people of other genders coming in and receiving services in the emergency room because of domestic assaults. And that was really when I started to see the harm that can be caused on a different level. And I moved into the field of, mental health and counseling work and continued that work, working with homeless adolescent mothers who had, lived with domestic abuse and had found ways to leave those relationships and were trying to reintegrate into the community in a safe way. And did that work for a good, another 10 years, and then lost a really close loved one, family member, to a domestic violence dispute murder. And it was 27 at the time. And it had a real profound impact on me as a human being. And at that point I was working with perpetrators. It was a difficult, really difficult experience on so many levels. And then continued on, a little further, decided it was time for me to take a little break and do some hiking, because I'm a backpacker and a hiker and a climber. And I got out on the Appalachian Trail and was doing the northern section. And it was raining sideways, and I was really miserable. And I thought, this is my vacation. Do I really want to be out here all by myself in the dark when it's raining sideways in a lean-to and I'm freezing? So I decided I would come up to this area, Mount Desert, for the first time. I'd never been on MDI and thought it'd be really fun to hike in the park. And I met my children's father there, and he was very excited about the work that I did and really supportive of that. And we began a relationship. And, a year later, I was pregnant with my first child. And about 5 months later, we had the first domestic violence incident between he and I. And it was shocking. It was really shocking. I never thought. And I think when I met him, I was at the point where I was probably the strongest I had been in my life. Not the weakest, contrary to what people think about victimization. And I was really stuck because I was pregnant. I had sold my home. I was living here in Maine. I hadn't been here very long. I wasn't working. and I was really vulnerable. And so it was another 8 years before I was able to leave that relationship. 2 children who are now adults. And when I think about, I always say it's like dancing with an octopus, that, when you meet this person, all these tentacles get attached, all these different connections, finances get enmeshed, the homes, you purchase homes together, you have children together, all of these ways that, you become attached. And to disentangle that is really hard. And so, it took 8 years to get all those tentacles off. And it came in stages, a little bit here, a little bit there. And one of the things he said to me, 2 things kept me there, shame and fear, right? Because he said, you'll never work in this field again. Who will come to you if you're a counselor for domestic violence? And this is, and it's public, this is happening in your own home. And I thought, if I'm going to get myself out of this, I have to be able to work. I have to be able to do my job. The biggest factor that kept me there was my 2 children, because in the state of Maine, they're going to be in the home 50% of the time without a buffer. And that's, and I get teary here when I share this, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when your child's hurt in that situation. And we don't have laws that protect. And so that's the position I was in as a parent. And I had to go through that process, and it was 3.5 years through the court system before I was able to provide the protection they needed. And here we are, and I worked 10 years in a domestic violence resource center in Maine and started a counseling program there. And now I run a small private practice in Ellsworth, and I serve women who have experienced domestic violence, people who identify as female. And I offer groups and individual counseling, and I do public speaking, and I teach at College of the Atlantic about intimate partner violence. So that's my story, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and of course my very important role on the board of finding our voices.
Thank you so much. And Liz is here. Liz True, please stand up. She's our board member too. I didn't realize she was here. Thank you. I think what I wanted to do is just ask everybody who's here on the panel, just put this question out. Just thinking back to when we were all trapped, if anyone here or anyone has a friend or a family member, someone they're worried about that thinks that they're in a dangerous or really unhealthy relationship, like, what's our advice for them? Does anybody want to say anything about that? What's our advice to what they should do?
Stay connected. It's easy to want to walk away because it's happening to someone else. In another place, behind a closed door. It's easy to get annoyed and frustrated when the person is just complaining and complaining and complaining about the same thing and the guy, and why doesn't she just leave? Be patient, be consistent, and stay connected the best way that you can, because that person is being isolated in more ways than you know.
That's right, and what it does is, if you're blaming them or judging them, you're just driving them further back to the guy, because he's up there like, I'm your only friend.
Yep.
And I have a radio show on WERU. It's called Let's Talk About It, every second Friday of every month. And my new one coming up is with this woman, Jolene. And she was telling me that for like 10 years, the police, every time they came to her house, always said to her, why don't you leave? Everybody was saying that to her. And she ended up leaving, and she ended up cooperating with the prosecutors. She did everything they told her that they were always wanting her to do. And he had like 20 felonies against him, including a high-speed car chase, endangering the lives of everybody in the area.
Let me guess, he got the kids.
Well, he's in prison, so he hasn't got the kids yet.
Okay.
But he was looking at like 40 years in prison, and she told me that at the time, because it was a couple years ago. I said, no, it's not going to happen, because I know the sentencing that happens in Maine for domestic violence. But then they told her, then they came and said that it's going to be 8 years, they said, 8 years straight time. And she wasn't happy with that. He was convicted like about 2 months ago. He's going to be out next November. And they dismissed the domestic violence with priors. Dismissed. This is his third felony domestic violence, and that's what she said. She said, I did everything they told me to, and no one's protecting her, so that's another reason that women don't leave. We wouldn't hear this on the streets. They know that they're not putting them in prison. It's not happening, and that's why it's really scary. I'm going to stand up there and testify, and he's just going to be angry. He's going to be out in a year. Does anybody else? And Mary Lou, did you have something you wanted to read or say something to say to everybody?
Well, on this topic.
Yeah.
We'll get back. We'll get to me when you finish this.
Does anybody else have anything to say about what they felt like, what could have been helpful for them, if anybody had said or done at the time, who might have been helpful or who wasn't helpful?
Well, I think when I was in the middle of it, I mean, even growing up, it was a big no-no to talk about anything. I mean, it has been. I mean, that's why we're talking about it, because a lot of the stigma is that you're not supposed to talk about it. It's your dirty laundry. You're not supposed to bring it up. And I had gotten out of a 5-year abusive relationship and hadn't discussed it with family, friends, children, nobody. And when I finally did start talking about it, when I joined with Patricia, so many of my friends and family were like, well, I thought it was awful that you were with this guy, and he was, but nobody wanted to say anything either, because it's just what you did. You just didn't do that, it wasn't their business. So I think just making it known to the person that is experiencing this, that you are available if they want to talk, and what was it? We found a statistic, how many 7 or 8 times a woman may try to leave.
Takes
but
an
then
average of 7 times.
7
It's
times,
7 times
yeah,
for me,
before
yeah.
they leave.
Yep.
Just knowing that, just being available throughout that process, because it is a process. It's a lot to figure out to leave an abuser like that.
There's something.
I spent my whole time protecting his name
Yeah.
and thinking it was my fault. And so no one, not our closest friends that couples we travel with, they didn't know. And so to make a long story short, after I left, my son invited me to go to California with his family for 2 weeks, and I stayed a year. So my friends called me for the Academy Awards, and they said, the Academy Awards were on tonight. I said, yeah. How come you weren't there? I said, what are you talking about? Because I did such a good job of not even, we were the perfect Catholic family with the 4 happy kids, and everything, and it was like heaven on earth. We walked out the door, and then we lived hell on earth. So I guess I just never, I think both Patricia and I didn't know I was suffering from domestic violence or domestic abuse. I thought if I did things better, and I also learned that I used to, I still pray, but I prayed that something would help, but I learned that you have to turn the knob and leave. That was a big lesson that I learned. It was up to me to turn the knob. And as I was 65 when I left, and as the garage door came down that day, I said I left my hell on earth there, and I had never looked back. I mean, I was scared, depressed, and whatever, but so I really wouldn't listen to him, because it was me that had the problem.
And Mary Lou and I were driving up here today, and another thing we started talking about is I just feel like these guys are the biggest thieves in the world, because what they rob from you, they rob your voice, they rob your free agency. And the other thing that we talked about is how they rob you being a parent. Like, we love our kids, we want to be good mothers. But maybe we could talk a little bit about how they prevent you from being a good mother. So they rob how do you say? They rob you your motherhood. Like, you can't be the mother you want to be. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Well, you're so depleted from trying to manage. I used to say it was managing the relationship 24/7. You're managing. And Sarah was talking about that too, like, and in your film, what's the day going to be based on his outlook or his demeanor or the way he's walking, even, if he's waking up angry, like, that sets the tone for the day. And so you're constantly, what can I do to, head this off and fix this and manage. And it's exhausting. And before you know it, you're doing that all day long, and your children are parenting themselves.
Yeah, and my daughter is a singer-songwriter, Jackie Lee McLean, and her music is on the radio show that I do. But she wrote a song about me, and it's called Halfway There. And I was like, it is a beautiful song, but when I first heard it, I was like, because she was talking about, like, I was halfway there, and that and then she realized, we talked about it, like, she understood why. you know, because I was always like on the lookout, like managing his moods. But there I wasn't a full mother because of that.
You're on high alert all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Your adrenals are mine are shot. I don't know about anybody else, but you're on that fight or flight 24/7.
Well, like Christine said, her mother wouldn't talk about it, and so I was in therapy, and so my therapist, like I always said, I did the best job I could. I really tried. I was whatever, but yet also, I'm gonna start crying too. My 4 kids, I was the only person that they had hope that might help them get out of it. And so for me to realize, to really accept I screwed up, that, there might be reasons, but my kids, one of my sons, I taught them to lie, and I did, to pretend. But I didn't see my responsibility. So my learning, internalizing it, understanding, that I really had some responsibility. I didn't, and I talked to each one of my kids, and that's, with one of my sons, it made the difference of us having a relationship or not. That I didn't just put it under the table. So that's another hard part about when you leave and you with your children. My kids still suffer in different ways.
Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
believe that, I was able to be present for my kids, but the challenge for me was what happened when I left, being able to protect them, and being able to protect them from things that were outside of my control, because I can only be responsible for me and my behavior. And, if I'm sharing a home with somebody else who's not responsible for their own behavior, it puts you in a really difficult position as a parent trying to navigate that, because then you're having to have adult conversations with your children that they're not prepared to have. But you're really thrust into that, trying to make some sense of what's happening. And then to function, with systems, our child protective system, the court system, that don't always play together, So, you can have a child protective case that it's fine for in my case, it was fine for my children to go back into the home, but then, the court has questions about that, and then the court says, there's a custody agreement, and you have to send them. And Child Protective says, you're failing to protect, so, and then I have to go into contempt in order to protect, and so there's just
big loophole there in our system.
huge
Absolutely.
loophole,
Yeah.
and there's no winning, and I went into this with a high level of understanding about how these systems work, and I often thought about, and with connections and knowing where to find resources, and I think, what would happen if I didn't have that? Mm-hmm. What would happen if I had prior systems involvement? What would happen if I was a substance user? And I'm still being victimized out here. It wouldn't have been so easy.
And that's true. Like, what would happen if you were picked up because a lot of substance abuse, women start drinking because they have to do something to try to handle this, and then they get an OUI, so then he uses that against you. Oh, you try to say, I did anything to you, you're a criminal. But does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? Yes.
I would just say that, all of this is taking place behind sort of a belief in both sidesism. So that any time that there's an issue taking place, there tends to be a belief that both parties are at fault.
Yep.
And I found for myself, when I was speaking about really difficult situations, that the only people who could understand were people who had been there.
Yep.
So, because otherwise that both sidesism is in place, and in a very subtle way, the person you're speaking to is looking for the way that you are wrong as well, that you are part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's just powerful. It's powerful.
But that's
Yes.
how our judicial system is designed. So, it's.
And I heard a district attorney say at one point, it takes 2 to tango
Oh,
when
I
we
heard
were
that
talking
too.
about a
Yeah.
domestic
Yeah.
violence.
Yeah.
I heard
And I
that
said,
too.
no, victimization is actually not.
My ex said that all the time.
Yeah.
It's so handy.
My grandfather was a lawyer, and he, growing up, always said, what's fair isn't always what's legal, and what's legal isn't always what's fair. And now I get it. Now I get it. And our legal system is set up on precedent. And so for decades, this is the way that we've done it. Mom and dad are fair. And the whole push of fathers get the short end of the stick in custody battles was a myth that was started back in the 80s, I believe, and by a group of fathers, trying to protect their rights.
Wow.
And that is not true. It never was true. And there is science to back that up. But yeah, that's how, so our uphill battle now, in order to change the system, is to change the precedent. How do you get an entire judicial system to turn on its head and say, oh, we've been doing it wrong all this time?
Right.
And so that's what we're up against. And so, the courts, they don't want to take children away from parents, abusers or not. And so 50-50 is the way you go in, and pretty much the only way around it is to try and prove that there's been some sort of either domestic abuse or some other form of abuse. And even then, it's, a slap on the hand.
But and
Yeah,
in
abuse of a parent looks different, right? So,
Right.
if it doesn't involve the child directly, there's a good chance that child's going to be back in the home.
Mhm.
If they're observing it, if they were not part of an assault or were not in the arms of a mother that was shoved. And so, you can extricate yourself, right? But then your child is still present in the home, and now you're not there as a buffer to protect. And I just think that's such a significant, painful
huge.
piece that I dealt
Yeah.
with, and I also,
I'm
through the
still
work
dealing
that I
with.
do,
Yep.
work with so many mothers that stay for that reason. We wait till our children are old enough to be able to speak for themselves. And then we send them with bags, that have emergency phones in them.
Oh, yes.
With
Hidden.
extra clothing, with food, and these things that we know these needs are not being met. And we talk to them about safety plans, how to evacuate, which neighbors to go to, where to run so that they're safe. It's terrifying as a parent.
Yeah. Mommy, why do I have to go?
Yeah.
Because some man in a black robe sitting on a bench said so.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to say? I don't. And my experience is a little different. So Dad is a Disneyland dad. So my son loves going to Daddy's house because he can eat all the candy in the world, and he's never told no, and he can play video games for 8 hours straight. He can learn to shoot guns at 5 years old. He can watch pornography at 4 years old. All of these things that are, again, out of my control because the court has determined that the children were not affected by the abuse. And so he willingly goes because all these amazing things happen at Dad's. And no matter how, I just have to keep consistent at my house. And this is what my therapist tells me, just stay consistent. He will get it. One day he will understand. He knows that Daddy doesn't make safe choices, but he doesn't quite comprehend what that means to him.
And if Daddy knows it bothers you, he's going to do it more.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's what it's for.
Exactly. And that's that post-separation abuse.
Yeah,
It's
because at least when
constant.
that's what I always thought, at least when I was with him, then I had some sway, I could, because when we were getting, But let's talk about financial abuse. But you have anything to say about financial abuse?
Yeah, I think that's really significant because, it costs money it costs money at any point in today's day and age. It's really hard. If you're not able to work, if all of your income goes into a joint account and, you don't have control over how it's spent, it becomes really hard to think about how do I secure a place to live. I don't know how you do that on one income anymore anyway, unless you're really fortunate. Thinking about where do I get food, how do I start over, I need to, come up with furniture, clothing, all of these things, right? So I think that can be a huge challenge. Also undermining, you at your place of work, if you are earning an income, the many numerous calls and texts and threats to uncover things to employers that aren't true, that will jeopardize your job, all of these pieces. And I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Well, also, there's a lot of women that we maybe think of or know that seem to be living a very high-income lifestyle, like me, for instance, but every single thing is in his name. We had 4 homes. They were all in his name. My car was in his name. And we had a prenuptial agreement that would have left me with nothing after 29 years. And I left at 55. I had 0 credit. Does anybody else have anything else they want to comment on?
I think there's so many facets of financial abuse. Mine I never would have thought of in a million years, but he's court ordered to pay child support. He will drop the check off, physically drop it off at my lawyer's office. So the secretary takes it in, gives it to my lawyer, he has to log it, he has to put it in a letter, he has to put it in an envelope and then mail it to me. And so who knows when I'll get it. And I just had to pay my lawyer for his time to get my $147 a week
Yeah.
child support payment.
And I think that's even if you can collect child support,
Oh,
because
yeah.
just because it's I was awarded child support when my oldest child was 10, and I collected probably about $400 in the
Oh,
remaining
yes,
years.
that's true. And then you try to take them to the court, and then it's like motions and appeals and the language that Sarah was talking about.
All of those motions, yeah.
Right.
And then a woman just told me that her husband her ex is in prison. And so they're garnishing whatever to get the court fines, but they're doing nothing because he's not paying child support while he's in prison. The courts don't care about that. They're after the court fines. And then they'll let the person out on probation, and the person will not pay their child support. Why isn't that part of the probation? Yes.
This is something I don't understand about the court system, so it's a pretty basic question. Why can the courts enforce 50-50 custody but not child support?
Well, they do enforce child support, but, the way that like in my situation, the way that they enforced that was to pull his license once a year. Because by the time they worked their way back around to it took about a year. And then he would have to work, he'd have to make 2 consecutive child support payments. He negotiated those payments so they were half the amount that was awarded to me. He would make those 2 payments, he'd quit his job, and we'd start over. And every year we would do the same thing. It would be the same cycle. And, I don't know, for 2 children, less than $200 once a year, is really not covering much. So, and if I want to pursue that myself, and I want to haul him into court, how is that going to be different? Because I'm going to be paying for an attorney, I'm going to be losing work time, I'm going to be, putting out all this effort, and we're going to be in the same place. Yeah, and we'll be in the same place,
I guess my question was more about enforcement. So if you have to do 50-50 custody, how do they maintain that? But if somebody is supposed to pay child support, I totally get and respect how difficult it is to extract that money. But why is the court not enforcing that if they are in custody?
When there's criminal behavior, you mean?
No, just in general.
Oh, in
This
general.
is why I said I'm probably not understanding something, but I hear you all say.
Yeah.
The court says we
I think the
have to-
same situation would happen if
Yeah.
the children weren't being shared 50-50. It would be up to the parent who wasn't getting their time to then hire a lawyer, go back to court and say, this isn't happening, and maybe there'd be made up time, or, there are no consequences that are speak loudly enough that scare the people into doing what the court tells them to
No,
do.
it didn't.
And it's not the police, it's not their job.
Well, I also
to
think
do
that
that.
all of the different organizations, are not communicating with each
Right,
other. That's
exactly.
a
They're
big
not
problem,
connecting
too.
the dots, yeah.
My ex was supposed to pay $66 a week for 3 children that didn't stay with him at all. And at one point, I was on food stamps and everything, and they took it away because they said I was making too much money. And I found out that he had applied for disability on behalf of the minor children that were living with him, but they weren't living with him. So he was getting that money, not paying child support. Then they cut off my services. And then when I went to try to talk to them, like, well, that's a Social Security problem. No, that's a DHS problem. And it took me 2 years. And in the end, they said, well, we're going to make sure you get the disability checks, but then he doesn't have to pay child support anymore. And he never paid child support. So he was like, I don't know how this is working. This doesn't make any sense.
And then one thing that I was talking to my daughter, and we were like, you sort of learn the things that you're, not supposed to do, and she was like, that's the problem. Like, you think you've learned them, but then there's always another one. And I think Mary Lou has a list of things that she was not allowed to do. Is that right, Mary Lou?
Yeah, because what we're talking about, my kids were older, so I didn't have to deal with the child support. But I'm really concerned about, people not truly understanding, like you were saying about, it's a two-way street, and it's like, and I had a conversation with a friend. We were talking a couple days ago, and I was talking about our dental program, and I said, how it helps women. That I said one woman wasn't allowed to brush her teeth. Well, this friend of mine didn't. She said it's just a hygiene. She couldn't comprehend. And so I'm going to start so you can have a sense of. I have a sense of humor too. So one of the things that happened to
He
me
didn't take
was
that from you. He didn't take that from you.
okay. He was concerned once that I got more junk mail than him. I mean, he was angry. I mean, but those are no dishes in the sink. Verbal abuse, only words that can't hurt. I will go to my grave knowing that you never supported me. You're selfish, self-centered, and no white jackets. Only floozies at the VFW wear white jackets. Only white paint on the walls. The kids had to have long jackets to cover their kidneys, and the thing is, I got a black eye this is the other one. Pink shirts with white collars. Only drug dealers wear pink shirts. So, because my son wanted to buy one. Let's see, what are some other? Oh, that was I didn't. He didn't want me to read while we watched TV. Turning the pages disturbs me, and can't we do anything together? That. We couldn't dim the lights for when we had company, because for quiet dinners, because he was afraid. He said, "I'm sure you're going to poison me," or this is good. Light switches all had to go on the same direction, but it just goes on and on. Oh, and this is the other thing: how to hand him money at a toll booth. I could only hand it to him with my right hand. Now I live with that shit. I lived with it, and. It was just abnormal became normal, I guess, and it was so much easier. Not that, but I thought the junk mail one was just really. I that day, I mean, and
You can't win.
You
That's
can't
it, you
win.
can't
Yeah,
win.
you can't win.
It's
Yeah.
funny now, but
not
how
funny, yeah.
absolutely frightening in the moment,
Yeah.
and how that. Junk mail, and I can't control that, and what am I going to do? And he's going to hurt me, and you get these. I mean, it's.
Well,
yeah.
you know what happened to you tonight about the phone ringing?
Yeah.
Someone said,
Sorry.
no, someone said PTSD doesn't need an invitation.
Nope.
And I still get PTSD, with a loud noise or whatever. Yeah.
So what I'm going to ask everybody here, Mary Lou left when we have women who are 32 and telling us, well, I can't leave because, I'm too old, like it's too late, like what am I going to do? And I'm saying Mary Lou left at 65 years old. And let's talk about what we've done since we've left that we would not have been able to do when we were with this person. And do you want to start, maybe, Mary Lou, do you have any things that you've done?
I won't go through all the other stuff about whatever I have, but I said here, I divorced in a year. During that year, I took the time to work on myself and how my history brought me to a place I was on August 21st, 2005, the day I left Charlie. I crossed over to the other side and began to create a new life for myself. I bought a small condo, decorated exactly the way I wanted it, and I also had a commitment to be slow and methodical about important decisions in my life. I wrote this and I really loved it. I felt like I was living on my own island, controlled by my decisions and choices of who, what, when, and where were allowed into my new home and my new life. I had limited funds, but I used them wisely. I awakened my travel bug and I had my first solo trip to Sicily to visit the country of my mother's birth. Now, I'm full-blooded Italian, and my ex was Irish, and he said all Italians are dumb and stupid. I mean, that was another absolute. So he would never go to Sicily. So I did that on my own, and I did a great job. I did great, and I had a fabulous time, and it was the first of many of my odysseys. I did volunteering at a Navajo Indian reservation, and did a hot air balloon in Sedona. You know, just. And I'm not wealthy, but I just say, but so I would have, it's been only 19 years, so I made a life, and but it's hard work. It was hard work to get myself out of that hole that I was in.
And Mary Lou drove from Scarborough, that's where she lives, to come to my house today so she could come here. And then we were staying at the Blue Hill Inn, and I had to meet a friend in Brooklyn. And I said, Mary Lou, do you want me to just bring you to the Blue Hill Inn? Because she came all the way from Scarborough. And then you could just rest up. Or do you want to come to Brooklyn with me? Because I'm going to, and then you could come to the Blue Hill Inn after. And so she called me up and she said, I've never seen Brooklyn. Let's go to Brooklyn. So it's all about yes with Mary Lou. Yeah.
I said, well, now that I'm kind of a little hobbly a little bit, I used to say to my friends, don't ask me, because I'm going to say yes.
And Christine, could you think of anything that you've
Well,
done?
you know, I realized in those 5 years that I was with my abuser, I didn't have any friends because he didn't like something about every single person in my life, family, friends, clients. And so it was easier to just not have them than to try to make that work. Again, the managing, you know. And so now I have lots of friends.
Yes, you do. Blue nail polish. That's something I could never do.
Oh gosh. I can use any word in the English language that I want to and not get punished for it. I can close the bathroom door as quietly or as loudly as I want. I can roll over in bed. Was not allowed to move once I was in bed.
Yeah, I remember.
I can wear what I want. Yeah. Have friends.
Yeah, I know people here tonight that have never experienced abuse, and I think it was in yours that none of us chose to be abused, and that's a part that I find that even when I found even a friend who could not comprehend, and it wasn't the brushing the teeth, it was just the idea. Like you said, I'm sure that day I was saying, oh shit, how come the mail gave me so much junk mail?
Yeah.
You know?
Now I'm in
Because
trouble.
I didn't want to start excuse my language.
And Pam, are there things that you would say?
Yeah, so I raised my kids, and they're amazing, and they're wonderful people, and I'm so very proud of them. And we climbed all the highest peaks in New England together, and hiking with my kids was not something that I was allowed to do in the relationship, so that was quite an amazing thing that we did. And I've taken many other trips, you know, backpacking and hiking trips with them and kayaking and so forth. I earned my another master's degree and completed the year of my PhD. I opened my own business. Those are things that would not have been possible in that relationship, and I wouldn't have been able to do that.
I can
Thank
say
you.
no. That's another one. I can say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking about like rolling over in bed. So in our room, he kept a handgun between the mattress and the box spring on his side. So he never had to say anything. But if I rolled over in bed and I woke him up, and I would never say no in bed because I don't know what he would do.
Well,
right?
that's the other thing.
And the whole
There's
sexual
there's
abuse.
marital rape, and me
Yeah.
too. I couldn't say no. In
His
fact,
hand right here.
yeah. And in fact, one time my daughter was, she was just a baby. She was an infant, and anyway, she was crying, and I could not go and see her because he wanted to, you know,
Yep.
just couldn't say no to him.
Nope.
And that's yeah. I mean, I
Neglecting the kids to take care of his needs.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did want to explain why we're wearing yellow. When I first started finding our voices, it was purple because that's the color of domestic abuse. But I don't really like purple. And
She likes blue.
and then it just ended up working out because now it's just Well, that's the other thing. I couldn't wear bright colors because I had an aunt who I loved, and Auntie Joan, and he would always mock her. And you're like your aunt. You're like your aunt. You're turning into your Aunt Joan. Like I didn't think anything was wrong with it, but he, because she liked bright colors, and so now really, we managed to get over to the bright side of safety and freedom, and we are shining a light for our sisters who are still in the dark. And does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.
I have one more. At the base of all of these traumas often is this financial grip.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, do you know of or are you assisting the development of marital patterns that make it impossible to financially abuse someone?
Oh, yes,
Good question.
actually,
Yeah.
Janine Oren, who's on our posters, and I think we just dropped off some posters at the Blue Hill Co-op. I think she's on one of theirs. She got it passed, and we had Finding Our Voices survivors testify for it. That makes financial abuse part of the definition of domestic abuse. So that passed, and so there is some protection there. Long way to go, but that was a pretty big deal. But now the insurance companies, or some companies were fighting it, but I think it does offer protection. So, but the lawyers aren't telling their clients about
The
it.
lawyers aren't telling.
Yeah.
Some of them
Yeah.
probably don't
And
even
it's
know
Yeah.
or understand.
With laws, it's hard because then do they enforce them and proof and everything? Yeah, but that's very important.
I think in some ways, though, I was thinking more like a version of a prenup, really, where women are finding out that the liabilities before they're in them.
That's a very good point. Janine actually says that marriage should be banned for that, because
Kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Marital laws
Yeah.
by men for the benefit of men in a patriarchal society. So
There you
we're
go.
always at a
There you go.
disadvantage functioning within that construct.
Yeah.
there you go.
Why would we think it works?
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? And we're going to be, and if we'll
This
just.
one.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm wearing purple.
That's okay.
I just want to say that one of the problems with the laws is that it's based on people being reasonable. And
Right.
you have, you know who.
Yes, great point.
It's not reasonable.
Great
Right.
point. Thank you, because for instance, my lawyer, who was very high-priced, there was a clause in our divorce settlement that any action for the court, we need to mediate first. You cannot mediate with an abuser.
Yes.
And my lawyer didn't protect me to not put that in. That's exactly right. Every time I hear that someone has to you cannot. They use that as a way to continue to abuse you. And then they're going to make it sound like they're really ready to do a deal, and then they're going to blow it up, and then you've just spent 8 hours, and usually you have to help pay for it. Exactly. Thank you. That's a very good point. That needs to be recognized in the judicial system, that when someone is an abuser, they have to be flagged as such, and it has to be treated differently. Do you have any suggestions on things that you think could help that?
Well, just, we have a daughter that was in a very abusive relationship, and
Sorry.
Yeah.
so getting the courts involved, it made it worse.
Yes.
He had to get a protection order. I was the devil. I thought he was going to come and kill us all. I mean, it was just crazy. And yet, he was, he was a Navy SEAL, and so police that would come, they're like, oh, we're all bros together.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mine was
Yeah.
mine was military too, and he'd been in the Air Force and then was National Guard, and got into a bar fight in his uniform, and the Maine State Police showed up. And he got in a fight because somebody walked up to him and said, "Hey, brother, you shouldn't be in your uniform drinking," and turned around and punched him. And the Maine State Police showed up and kindly gave him a ride home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if I can just say something, because it goes to, it's further to what Mika was just saying, that, you know, that I work with a lot of victims of violence, including victims of intimate partner violent offenders, and so I've ended up working with those men. And the thing about them is that, you know, you can name all kinds of crimes, all kinds of offenders in crimes who commit crimes but know they're doing something wrong. Most intimate partner violence offenders don't even think they're doing something wrong. I mean, that is the fundamental problem that we have. And, you know, going to the bothism, it's like people just say, you know, can't we all just get along? Can't
No,
you guys
you
work
can't.
this out?
No.
They just don't realize. I mean, you all know this, but you named it, Sarah. I mean, you know, they're sociopathic, they're narcissistic, they are really violent people
Dangerous.
who don't think and feel the ways that we do. And it's so important to know that, to recognize that. They're not mentally ill. Well, they are, but they're not diagnosably or whatever.
Right.
Well, it's
yeah.
systemic. It's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years that men have the power and make all the decisions. And
That they're a
We're still
unique
up
form of
against it.
criminal, which you're saying, which is
Yeah.
true. I really,
That is how I feel about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
John, you know, I think the point you're making is this is a value systems-based problem, not an emotional regulation problem. And I think that's what we forget. This isn't about anger, this is about control, and it comes from a different place.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, if I may just say, I mean, you guys are so amazing. I'm just speaking, I speak from a place of privilege as a freshly retired member of the board. But I just want to say, I mean, when you think about what's happening here tonight, you think about the silence that you lived in and with. This is really amazing. You're on video talking about these most intimate kinds of violations in Blue Hill. I mean, this is so amazing.
thank you, ladies.
Thank
Thank
you.
So my It poem, it was never going to be published, okay? I wrote this 2 months before I left my husband. And I used to write in my journal, because I didn't know what it was. I said, it happened again. And so this is 2 months before I've left my ex, and I write in my journal. And just when I say it, think of domestic abuse. It sits in my stomach. It aches in my heart. It encompasses my being. It chokes at my soul. It kills my spirit. It eats at my thoughts. It puts a cloud all around me. It swallows my self-esteem. It is powerful. It is painful. It is ugly. It is cold. It is angry. It is empty. It is controlling. It is sad. And that just came from my heart and soul that day.
Wow. Powerful.
And that's the definition of domestic abuse.
You didn't even know it was domestic abuse.
No, that's
why
what
you
I'm
call it
saying.
it.
It was it.
Thank you very much for coming and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.